I am back with Ella Leon, who just read a sample from the Sapphire Heiress. And there are so many yummy things in this book and in this scene that I want to ask you about. Let's start with piracy and this very interesting contrast that you're setting up where the heroine didn't know her family were pirates. She's having a negative reaction to it. And the pirate hero is kind of like, well, the upper classes all just take their wealth. Can you talk to me about how you got drawn into writing a pirate story and what made you interested to draw this comparison?
Well, I think it was in my research where I discovered that there are some historians that believe that some pirates come from wealthy, respectable families, especially privateers like Blackbeard. So it got me thinking, once they retire, and they all have to retire, would they be going back to the London ballrooms? And, would they be mingling again with high society? And I think they would, because a lot of times just one venture, just one expedition, and you could make the equivalent of millions today. So it was a very enticing career path for some people to go in, especially if they had the means to get that letter of marque to be a privateer, or, if you just had a fast enough ship and could hire a crew. So it was that whole idea. And the main character, May, she has all these negative connotations about pirates. And I think a lot of us have that today too. I mean, I think some of them are true because it was very much like a violent type of lifestyle. And you did have to be pretty rough of a person to do those kind of things and morally gray, I guess you could say. But like I said, I do think there was, a part of it where these people were from high society or so-called high, higher society. And there is that interesting contrast there that I play with. But yeah, May very much has this negative connotation that she associates with pirates. And when she finds out that her family was actually pirates, I think it makes her rethink the whole idea of piracy, what piracy, not just what piracy is, but I guess the reasons why someone would go into piracy. And it's, I guess, maybe for more complicated reasons, because I think back then people, it was harder to poverty was, they had a much higher poverty rate back then. And a lot of times it was the only way some sailors could make money, because being a sailor on a ship, that was a really hard way of life, really difficult conditions, I've read. And a lot of time you wouldn't even get paid. So the reason, so you could see why it would be so enticing to become a pirate. And those ships then too, like pirate ships were run as democracies. So more democratically. So you could see why, that would be so enticing.
Especially compared to the naval ships, where if you were a sailor, the commanders were basically the totalitarian leader
Yeah,
who could
they
kill you
gave
at any
orders.
moment.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and also on the morally gray thing, like the letter of marque was the monarch sanctioning you to attack enemy ships. And so then is it morally gray if you're being told by your monarch, yeah, you can make money just by attacking these Spanish ships if you're British? So
Yeah.
clearly you've done some research on piracy. Can you talk to me about your research process for writing the historical part? And then at what point does the fantasy part come in, and does your research interact with that at all?
Well, I guess the research I did was really just like, what was it like to be a pirate? And, I did learn that pirates didn't just steal gold and silver. They stole whatever was on the ship. And they would even, they wouldn't just like kill people. Sometimes they would take someone for ransom. But it was still a very violent way of life. And it kind of helped inform the background of the hero Locke. And because he has a very tortured past, kind of traumatized past, and very tortured type hero. Um, and the heroine, she kind of represents the goodness that he wants back in his life, because he's trying to leave that life behind. But getting back to the research and the magic quality to it, I guess the sapphire, it was really just the whole idea of like what would happen if you were a pirate, and what if you attacked a ship that had some kind of magical cargo, as Locke did. And that's how the novel opens, is he steals something from the ship and he doesn't know who this ship belongs to, and it ends up belonging to a secret society called the Silver Order. And they come into play later on in the book. But you have to be careful who you steal from, I guess.
Mm.
And the Silver Order is kind of what connects all three books across the series too.
Very cool. Very cool. And just on the topic of pirates, I know that there's a big difference between what became lore about pirates versus what is historical record about pirates. So, like, no one actually walked the plank, but we all think of pirates walking the plank. How did you approach that for writing this story, especially because it's Victorian, so May would already know a lot of that lore, but Locke has been living the real life. So, like, in your story, what was your approach towards that?
There's definitely the romantic parts of piracy that there's a reason it became lore. And that's the parts that I find interesting. And the whole like treasure hunt. I know that, especially historical writer, there's some things that are true and some things that are like lore, like you said. But in my eyes, I think the reason why stuff is lore is because it's interesting. And honestly, that's the stuff I latch onto sometimes. I mean, I make it realistic, but the whole treasure hunt, that's maybe a little bit more on the side of lore than historical, but it's possible. I mean, if you had a lot of wealth, you would want to hide it, and maybe in different multiple places. And even today, we found like hordes of coins. I always thought that was interesting when they made a big discovery, or they make a big discovery of like a vessel of coins, and you think about the person that hid them there, and did they make a map for somebody to later find? And part of my inspiration too for this was The Count of Monte Cristo, especially the movie version. I did read the book. The book was very long because it was serialized. But I did draw some of the inspiration from the treasure hunt from The Count of Monte Cristo and the cave and all that. And so
Yeah,
honestly, I like sometimes I go for the lore. Like
absolutely.
exciting, more interesting parts of history, or they all have to have an origin, some origin in fact.
Right. Well, and also, we're not reading historical fiction to learn history. We're learning it to be entertained. And so that
Right.
is the entertaining part of it.